Hi, everyone. Life Coach Carissa here. Today, I want to share my story of how I stopped over drinking. What was I drinking, you might ask? Well, it was mostly sweet red wine initially, but then I moved to some different alcoholic products, which I will tell you more about in just a little bit. Why do I want to do this? I want to share this story because if there are individuals, even one person out there that feels like they are in a similar place as I was, I want to be able to give them a path forward, something maybe that they haven't heard before. And that is the sole reason why I am doing this. So I want to start by saying that this is my story. And I do not want to sound like my path is the only path for someone to get a better handle on their drinking or any addiction that they may have. I also don't want to make it sound like what worked for me is going to work for everyone. I know there are different severities of habits and addictions, but I want to share my story of how I changed my relationship with alcohol in case anyone finds themselves in a place like that where I was at, and maybe they don't know that there's another way that they could work on this. So I just want to offer the option and possibility to them. And this happens to be the path that worked for me and transformed my life. I am just so grateful that I did this work for myself. I mean, really, why would I not share this with others if it could potentially help someone? So I recognize that going pretty far back, I enjoyed alcohol purely because of the way it would make me feel. Lighter, less stressed, more carefree. The taste of alcohol never really appealed to me, so it was definitely more about the results than the taste. In fact, my choices in alcohol would end up being purely focused on how sweet it could be. I can remember asking bartenders, "What's a sweet and fruity drink, that you would recommend?" And that was my requirement, right? Never was a fan of beer. It had to be very sweet, very fruity. So my addiction sort of started out slow, right? Like it was like I would drink mostly on the weekends and in social settings, maybe out with friends or at parties. And then I noticed over the years that I had taken a strong liking to this sweet red wine. And coincidentally, around this time is when our kids were younger. And I was always aware of my consumption and that it was increasing, right? Like I never checked out from that. Like I was completely aware of how much I was wanting it. And so as our son entered his teenage years, my consumption seemed to increase even more, right? And I would look forward to a glass of wine in the evenings to better handle the discomforts of life. When our son started driving, I would do it to calm my nerves. And I can recall like numerous Friday nights where I would be having my glass of wine and I noticed that my husband would plan ahead and not drink anything just in case if something would happen, with our teenage son out there driving around, that he could, be able to be jumping in the car and driving to wherever he needed to go. But no, not me. Calming myself down felt like the number one priority to me. I can recall a realization at some point. I was driving home from work late one evening, and I recognized that I was literally thinking about opening that bottle of wine and pouring it into a glass. It was almost like I could taste it and I would be salivating at the thought of it, right? It was more predominant at those times when I had a long day at the office, and then I'd be driving home and sort of dreading whatever the latest teenage challenge might come up, when I got home. And I used to have one glass and then two and then three. And then I got to this point where I was literally finishing off a bottle in the span of an evening. And so I had this awareness of my over desire and that it was increasing, but it didn't stop me. Right. I remember multiple times stopping at the grocery store on my way home, and I was staring at all the wine bottles, trying to find something new. Anything raspberry, right? I would search for anything raspberry. That was my thing. So, when we went on family vacation at the lake one year, I remember bringing this cooler and keeping it in our bedroom with all my wine stash. And I remember getting a larger container, to drink it out of with a straw because that meant fewer trips to refill. So clearly, like a big part of my life had begun to rely on alcohol to be happy and calm. I did associate alcohol and my wine with being happy and calm. I used to think I'm a better mother. I can handle things better. So things like this escalate, right? You start at one place and you just start to break down those limits that you once had on yourself, and it just becomes more and more of your focus. And so much of it happens subconsciously, right? It's like I'm going to be very real and vulnerable with you right now and sharing this story, but I think it's important to really illustrate how fixated my brain was on getting that next hit of dopamine in the form of wine. I recall another time at the office that I had this brilliant thought. If I would just bring in some alcohol and keep it in my office, I could just take a sip to take the edge off before these meetings that we have. I'd be more relaxed. I remember thinking it and saying to myself, wow, Carisa, that is pretty bad that you are even having that thought. I never did that, thankfully, but just the fact that these urges were happening was really starting to concern me. I had seen alcoholism present in my family history, and I knew what it could look like. And of course, I would always, have the thought, that's not me. I have it all under control. But I continued to do what I was doing and having those moments of pause. And then I'd go right back to what I was used to, those habitual behaviors that I had kind of gotten into a rut and a routine. So like intelligently, I knew all this sweet red wine was not good for me. So my primitive brain, the genius that it is, decided that instead of wine, maybe I could switch to a harder version of a drink, some harder alcohol, and I could have the same effects, but drink less. That is what my brain offered me. I remember telling my husband that, and he just looked at me and nodded. So that's what I did, and it worked for a little while, but then guess what happened? One of those glasses was no longer enough. So now I'm increasing the intake of the harder stuff. It's a vicious cycle, right? So fast forward to 2020 when COVID arrives, my whole world is forced to slow down. And this is when I had the big life-changing realization that I did not like the life that I was living. I did not like how I was feeling mentally and physically. So I began working with a functional medicine doctor, and my health was starting to not look so great based on some blood tests and lab work that we were doing. And I knew that one of the main areas that I was going to have to address was my alcohol consumption. So through my life coaching certification, I was studying a program called Stop Overdrinking. And that is the protocol that I began to follow, right? Had no idea what kind of journey it would lead me on, but I was hopeful and optimistic. So I'm not going to run through the whole entire Stop Overdrinking program with you today, but what I will tell you is the path incorporates things like understanding what is happening inside my brain with the over desire for alcohol and how dopamine is at the heart of it. And my primitive brain is trying to be in control. But I have this intelligent brain, my prefrontal cortex, that I can use to change my habits and my behaviors. I also learned how trying to quit from pure willpower, is not going to work, and resisting it just really leads to the anxiety, which led me to more over drinking and consuming. I also learned to recognize when I was buffering in my life. And buffering is when I'm using something else to cover up the feelings that I don't want to feel. So like if I don't want to feel the discomfort of this, I will use this, which feels better, right? I also learned how to process urges and have a plan ahead of time, even knowing how to plan for obstacles that can come up and maybe arise, even though I have a plan. And I really became aware that once you unlock or unlearn that desire for alcohol, the lack of desire now becomes automatic. It becomes your new normal. It's absolutely amazing, right? So there was a lot of steps in this path and a lot of work that I did, but ultimately I stopped drinking on September 1st, 2020, and I still have the video on my phone from November 20th, 2020, when I poured out all the remaining alcohol that I had been holding on to, and I poured it down the sink. And I didn't touch alcohol at all for about a year. And I went over 2 years before I had a sip of wine again. I think I just tried it to see what would happen. And I was like, okay, I don't need it. I don't really want it anymore. That desire had been brought down to such levels that I didn't have the craving. And I think I wanted to test myself and see if like it just, reattached itself to me. And it didn't. I was really, really proud of that moment when I recognized that like I can have it if I want to, and I don't really need it. So where I am now, 2.5 years later, is that I no longer have that over desire. I can go out with friends and I can have a drink or two, and I can be completely content. I don't find myself craving or thinking about it. When was the next time I'll get it? In fact, I never sit and think about alcohol anymore. It's just not a big part of my life now. And I love that. I am so proud of myself for interrupting that pattern of behavior. And I'm so grateful that I pushed through all the urges to get to the other side of this intentional life that I have created. And for any pessimists out there, I assure you, I did not replace over drinking with another unhealthy habit. I would say that I really did replace it with more healthy self-care practices that I love and fuel me in so many other ways. Like I can get the enjoyment out of reading my book each night and not even miss that wine. The bottom line is I used to think that I needed alcohol to survive my everyday life. And through this plan and this process, I learned that that was completely false. And I took all my power back by thinking with my intelligent brain and using deliberate thoughts and planning. I know from my story that I am living proof that you can stop over drinking and eliminate that over desire. This process really could work for other areas where you have over desires in your life. In fact, I have repurposed this same process in other areas of my life to stop some of those things that I have an over desire for: sweets, sugars, bread, pasta. I hope sharing my story will prompt you to acknowledge any of the areas in your life where over desire is kind of ruling your life. And you would maybe consider focusing on this so that you could get to a much better place with it, just like I did. There is nothing special about me. I just learned the process, followed it, and embraced this new version of the person that I became. My daughter and I were walking through Myers recently, the grocery store, and we passed the wine aisle. And she said, "Mom, do you remember when you would stand here staring at all the wine?" And I said, "I sure do, Jenna. And I do not miss it at all. I'm so glad that I worked on that part of my life and I changed it. I feel so much better. My health is better. My mind is better." That was such a proud moment, right? I probably didn't take it all in as much as I should, but her seeing me change, so powerful. So I really am proud of myself. And I thank God for being with me on that journey and the universe for showing me what was possible. And, again, if know someone, if you or someone struggles with addiction to alcohol or other substances, I am not saying that this is the solution for them. What I want to convey is that I had an over desire for alcohol that was not serving me well in my life. And I believe I was definitely headed towards a much bigger addiction. And this process and plan allowed me to press a stop button and do a hard reset. And I took all my control back. And that's what I want to let you know happened for me. And it's possible that others out there, this could help you as well. Thank you so much for listening. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, please click the like and share button so that I can reach more individuals that maybe this support, would help an area of their life. That means the world to me. You can also click the subscribe button so that you get notified as soon as I release a new video. And as always, thank you for joining. And I will be back in a couple weeks to share a new topic with you. Have a great day.